Hello, it's early September 2022. I'm Peter Carter. I'm making this video for the Climate Emergency Institute. It's a report that's been coming out every year for a few years now. The report's called United in Science. It was just released a couple of days ago on the 13th of September. So, as described here, this is a multi-organization, high-level compilation of the most recent science related to climate change impacts and responses. And there are all the logos of the world-leading climate agencies. The WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, introduced the report with a headline, "We are heading in the wrong direction." Well, that's certainly putting it mildly, because we're headed in a direction for devastation. And that's definitely confirmed by this report. So this is a group of young people in Canada. This is one of many groups of young people that for many, many years have been complaining to their governments that their governments are continuing to compromise and now wreck their future by continuing to allow and push more fossil fuel extraction and fossil fuel burning. So there are many of these groups, and the amazing thing is that in every case the governments have fought the young people. The governments have spent a lot of money with lawyers, a lot of time, many, many years, in actually fighting the case that these young people have a right to a livable future. That is absolutely unbelievable, and it doesn't change. The climate gets worse and worse and worse, but the government attitude doesn't change. So this is just on the sort of first page of the United in Science, and it's a infographic, but it's really pretty good to just start with introducing the main points. CO2 emissions in early 2022 were higher than the pre-pandemic levels in early 2019. And that is because our governments poured money into the fossil fuel industry, huge amount of money, and of course by the continued financing of the fossil fuel industry by the big banks. The ambition of new emissions reduction pledges needs to be 7 times higher to meet the 1.5 degrees C goal. Well, the governments, we keep on hearing this word ambition. The governments have no ambition whatsoever. The only ambition that they have is to support the fossil fuel industry by permitting, pushing, and even continuing to subsidize the fossil fuel industry. Atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations continue to increase. 2015 to 2021 were the 7 warmest years on record. Global warming is continuing to increase. There is a 93% chance that at least 1 year between 2022 and 2026 will be the hottest year on record. Oh, well, that is going to happen. I mean, there's just no question about that. As global warming increases, tipping points in the climate system cannot be ruled out. That is way, way behind the times in the science on tipping points. We've had 2 big, very big, important scientific papers just out, one just out a week ago, another one just out like a month ago, making it very, very clear that we have already crossed a number of what the scientists call tipping thresholds. Every year that goes by, we are moving further and further into tipping point territory and devastating global climate disruption and oceans disruption. Climate change made extreme heats and floods worse in 2022. but they say early warning systems can reduce the risks. Very temporarily, perhaps, but all the time that we have accelerating global warming and climate disruption, early warning systems, which are a great idea and they should have been in place years ago, they're not going to do a heck of a lot to reduce the inevitable devastation of rapidly increasing extreme weather events. And this mentions floods. Well, of course, the 33 million people flooded out of their homes in Pakistan in a awful, awful situation. A third of Pakistan is still underwater. They have lost a huge amount of their crops, like 30%. A huge amount of their agricultural land is ruined for a number of years. Nearly half of their agricultural land. This is a mega climate devastating impact. And so key messages in some more detail. Atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations continue to rise, and fossil fuel emissions are now above pre-pandemic levels, and the fossil fuel industry, the banks and our governments are going to push it higher and higher and higher. Recent years saw record high temperatures and ocean heat. Ocean heat continues to accelerate. There is a 48% chance that we will touch 1.5 degrees C within 5 years. 1.5 degrees C is the danger limit, the globally disastrous danger limit, and it is now completely unavoidable, despite the fact that people who should know a lot better are claiming that we can still limit warming to 1.5 degrees C. And this was even in this report, United in Science, in the introduction. They referred to a window of opportunity for 1.5 degrees C, which is absolute nonsense, and very, very dangerous nonsense. Mitigation pledges are insufficient. They're insufficient to prevent total climate planetary catastrophe. Continued warming is increasing the likelihood of irreversible changes in the climate system, that's tipping points. So this is now very well established by the science. All are now agreed that they are real and they are planetary tipping points. Billions of people around the world are exposed to climate change impacts now. The report mentions cities and urban health and health impacts I was very pleased to see. Adaptation is crucial. It says here to lower the risks. That's really pushing it. Years and years ago, there was a rule amongst the climate scientists that there was no adaptation without mitigation. So adaptation, of course, must be done. Governments are not going to be able to make a huge amount of difference in that, and they're certainly not doing so at the moment. Look at Pakistan, still appealing for floods to try and start to recover from this fossil fuel devastation, because that, of course, is what it is. So there's, I left this slide. This is the urban health, and so I was very glad to see they have this. I just want to point out the big one is air pollution. Fossil fuel burning, of course, we've known for decades, produces deadly air pollution. And the more we research, the worse it is. The latest research is that specifically fossil fuel emissions, air pollution, is responsible for 10 million deaths a year. That is an unprecedented mega crime, continuing to cause the death of 10 million people every year is an unprecedented evil, obviously. So here's the United Science on atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations. They are rapidly increasing. In the text, they explain that they are increasing all three, that is CO2, methane CH4, and nitrous oxide, that all three for the past few years are actually increasing faster than ever. So I have added these arrows, straight lines, so that you can see that. Now this is carbon dioxide. It's methane in the middle and nitrous oxide there. So carbon dioxide, the report says, has increased 149%, so it's practically, and it is this year, 50% higher than its pre-industrial level. In the case of methane, that is right out of sight, 262% increase, which means that methane concentration in the atmosphere has increased by a factor of 2.6, and it is increasing faster than ever, which is fairly obvious there. And there's nitrous oxide, that's increased by 23%, and that's also increasing faster than ever. So this is a picture of planetary devastation. This is a picture, this is a record of the climate change suicide scenario that our governments and our major corporations still have us on. So this is the criminal evil of all time. This shows what is called the rapid rebound of CO2, fossil fuel CO2 emissions after the COVID-19 sharp drop in emissions. This is from the International Energy Agency. It runs from 1900. You can see then here this huge sudden drop in CO2 emissions, but governments immediately, once they decided, of course, they had to do an economic recovery against all advice, they poured most of the money into the planetary destroying fossil fuel industry, so it shot right back up again. And now it's as bad as ever, and emissions are increasing faster than ever. The 1 year increase was a 1 year increase record of all time. This is a little bit of an odd slide, because this is the 5-year mean of global temperature increase. So this is a familiar global warming chart, but it actually didn't give the temperatures. The vertical axis, of course, always has the temperature increases, but it wasn't there. So I took it from the report and I added it in. So the temperature increase is 1.17 degrees C. And the report also confirmed that we are in a 3-year cooling La Nina. So that is very, very unusual to have it in 3 years. And the NOAA says it's as strong as ever. And even so, we have rapid increase in global temperature, 1.17, as I say. So I added this trend mainly to point out that there was a reversal of cooling at the beginning of the last century. So when we look at 1800 here, the climate was cooling, and that warming has actually increased progressively ever since on the trend line. So that's a heading, obviously, for global surface heating, total catastrophe. So this is from one of the climate centers that the United in Science made their global warming graph from. This is from the Berkeley Earth, and they've taken the increase from 1850 to 1900, pre-industrial, and they have added now a linear, a straight line trend based on the rapid increase that started around 1980. It was up and down and not a huge increase, but 1980 it just started going down. So Berkeley Earth has taken this linear projection, and they say that we will be at 1.5 degrees C on a linear projection by 2033. I'm sure we'll be there before, because after all, emissions and greenhouse gas concentrations are accelerating, and on a linear projection we'll be at 2 degrees C 2059 according to Berkeley Earth. Now 1.5 degrees C is globally disastrous. That was made very clear by the 2018 excellent 1.5 degrees C report from the IPCC. 2 degrees C. 2 degrees C is way past the tipping point threshold for almost all of the tipping points. All the major tipping points, they're tipped at 2 degrees C. So that's a planetary catastrophe, and we have to do our darndest to avoid that now. And of course the IPCC has told us what to do. The sixth assessment said in no uncertain terms, made it very clear, emissions of greenhouse gases have to be put into decline, quote, immediately and rapidly. This is the next one from the United in Science. This is the global ocean heat content. This is a tremendously important record. 93% of the heat added to the planet, the climate system, from our greenhouse gas emissions goes into the oceans. That is a terribly bad thing, because vast though the oceans are, this is already disrupting the function of the oceans. And it's already causing increasing ocean deoxygenation. And there are two records here. You can see that again that the big rapid increase started around 1980, and clearly this is an accelerating trend. That's very obvious, and an accelerating trend has been published because it's pretty obvious, like I say. So again, I put the trend line in here, and just to see, yeah, that's accelerating. Now, in addition to ocean heating, we also have ocean acidification, but this wasn't in the United in Science report. And so I put this in from the IPCC 6th assessment. Ocean acidification is measured by pH, hydrogen ion potential, and pH is the inverse of ocean acidification. So you'll see the original record here from the IPCC. And so I just inverted them so that you can see the relative ocean acidification, and I pulled up the vertical axis a little bit so you can really see that it's definitely accelerating. Now, the big thing to see is that on all of these scenarios, ocean acidification continues up to 2050. This is sea ice from United in Science. Here's the Arctic sea ice at the top, and the Antarctic sea ice at the bottom. And again, I put trend lines in here. Now, the Arctic sea ice was declining, losing extent due to the melting of amplified global warming, Arctic amplification. The Arctic, the scientists now say, is warming 4 times as fast as the rest of the planet. But look here, over the past few years, that slowed right down and practically stopped. This is confirmed on all the measurements, confirmed on ocean, confirmed on sea ice extent, on thickness, and in volume. And this was always anticipated years and years ago, and ever since. The projections of the ocean sea ice decline, which there's been a lot of argument about, but the modelers did get this right. And the reason it slows down, and it slowed down now, is that there's a very different dynamic between thin ice and thick ice. And there's a feedbacks, whereby when it's total thin ice, which it practically is now, the melting is slowed up. Of course, that's not going to last for all that long, and we're going to lose all the sea ice, obviously. We have passed the tipping point for loss of summer sea ice. Again, James Hansen warned us about that many years ago. So why is the loss of sea ice so important? Because it's a massive feedback. The millions of square miles of Arctic sea ice, it's the freezer, if you like, the air conditioner for the northern hemisphere, the air conditioner for the entire northern hemisphere. And losing sea ice extent is losing the reflective property of the sea ice, which shines solar energy right back up to space, and that is replaced by dark open ocean, which is unfortunately for the future a very good absorber of heat. So the sea ice is absolutely crucial to the future of the entire planet, not just the Arctic and not just the northern hemisphere. Here's the Antarctic. Now, the Antarctic, as you may have heard, the sea ice has been increasing. So there you see it increasing, but in the past few years, again, things have changed. And there's a fairly rapid decrease over the past few years, at least, of Antarctic sea ice as well. So I put these in on the ice sheets. These are for the Copernicus, that's European Climate Change Indicators, which is an absolutely excellent source. So this shows the Antarctic ice sheet, the Greenland ice sheet, and of course the sea level rise. And the ice sheets are melting at a terribly fast rate. They are on the worst case scenario. That's been published by the Science a few years ago. This is the Antarctic ice sheet, the mass, the weight of that. And look how fast it's been coming down. I mean, it's been crashing down. The West Antarctic ice sheet is this one here in the greeny color and in the mauvey color, all of the ice sheet. The West Antarctic ice sheet is destabilized. The East Antarctic ice sheet, which of course is the vast majority of the ice, that has appeared to be stable all along, and until recently, again the past few years, there's a question, and there's some very worrying publications that the East Antarctic ice sheet is not as stable as we had assumed it was, vast though it is. And there's the Greenland ice crashing down, accelerating loss of ice sheet mass, accelerating melting of the Greenland ice sheet. There's a irreversible tipping point on the Greenland ice sheet. The IPCC puts that as low, relatively low, as 1.5 degrees C of warming. We're into tipping points on the Greenland ice sheet. And so this is sea level. Again, I put a red line there. Very obvious. It's been confirmed by publications that sea level rise is accelerating. It's due to two factors, of course. Thermal expansion. You warm up water, it expands. And the other one, of course, what we've just been looking at, the rapidly increasing melt from the ice sheets. The melting of the ice sheets is so fast now that that is contributing more than half of the sea level rise. So that's happening very, very, very quickly. So I'm going to show a few maps. So I put this world map that you can refer back to. So we're now back to United in Science, and here's the temperature change relative to about 2000. So the temperature change, this now is a projection. So they split this into summertime and wintertime. Obviously it's summertime that we're most interested in. And so in the very near future, you see the United States is heating up very, very fast. Central Asia and southern Eastern Europe there, a vast amount of territory heating up very fast, extending right up to the western Siberia. But everywhere is going to warm up a lot. So everywhere is heating up. I want to point this out in particular. The Amazon, it's too late for the Amazon. It's being cleared, destroyed at such a rapid rate, set on fire. But also, and this has been obvious for years, that the Amazon is very, very vulnerable to drought and very vulnerable to surface warming as well. So you can see this, it just happens to cover the entire Amazon. This is another one of the projections, 2022 to 2026. And this is precipitation, this is rainfall. So you see there's a huge problem with the trend of rainfall. The red is less rainfall. The blue is more. Look at the Amazon again. Way less rainfall over the Amazon, and in fact over practically all of South America, particularly in the United States, particularly the western United States. Also Europe. You see that area there with a great reduced rainfall trend, and we've experienced the unprecedented droughts in the summer of 2022. Africa, South Africa, less rainfall. That's been predicted for many, many years. And of course, there are areas of extreme rainfall projected, and that's as damaging as drought and heat. It can wash away crops, as Pakistan has experienced, has been made to experience this year, from the absolute criminal injustice of continuing to emit greenhouse gas emissions. So this is global heat projection. This is from the IPCC 6th assessment, and this is the maximum daily heat at 1.5 degrees C. Everywhere is heated up enormously. United States, Canada, South America, Southern Africa, Europe, West, Central and East, Saudi Arabia, China, and up again into Mongolia, and Australia. So 1.5 degrees C is globally disastrous. This is soil moisture, which of course is a drought indicator. This is from the IPCC AR6, drought at 1.5 degrees C. You've just seen heat, and drought is bad, bad, bad. United States up into Canada, most of South America, all the Amazon again. Chile's in a mega drought, as I've already said. South Africa, North Africa, Europe, Western, Central Europe, the Baltic states again around there, and China. Very, very bad prospects for drought in China at 1.5 degrees C. Australia, severely into drought at 1.5 degrees C of warming. This is perhaps the most important one. This is a graph, a record that's been around year after year after year after year, and it's always shown the same thing. First of all, this is emissions, global emissions of carbon dioxide equivalent, and that's all the major greenhouse gas. So emissions here, and the record, the time goes up to 2030. 2020 here, which I'll come to in a minute. So the IPCC, in their 6th assessment, said that current policies have us headed for an end of the world warming of 3.2 degrees C this century. That's no future at all. The IPCC AR6 did point out that we're in a situation now when we have to, quote, secure a livable future. Now, when the conservative IPCC says something like that, you know we are in big, awful, terrible, unprecedented trouble. The entire human race. Now, this is the one that's been around for many years, as I say. This is the projection of what emissions had to do in order to meet the 2 degree C limit and in order to reach the 1.5 degree C limit. And you'll see that in both cases, emissions had to be in decline 2020. This shows, of course, the big drop in emissions and the rapid rebound that I've already mentioned, the absolute deplorable criminal rebound brought about by financing from our own governments, as well as the big banks, of course. And so that leads to the current policy scenario as I've described. So here's the all-important red line. I have been watching this literally for decades. 2020. And 2020 has come and gone, and emissions are still increasing. And so I actually collected all these together, probably about 20 publications that show exactly the same thing. The publications have been coming out year after year after year, all said the same thing. At the absolute very latest, global emissions had to be in decline 2020. And we know from the IPCC 1.5 degrees C report, we know the same. They got 2020. They also, most importantly, had the fact that global emissions, particularly CO2 emissions, had to be reduced 50% by 2030. From 2020, 50% by 2030. And what are our governments doing? They're supporting the fossil fuel industry, and they're pushing not only continued emission, but they're pushing ever higher emission on a planet-killing, unlivable future scenario. Which takes me back to final word for all of the young people in all the world. They do not deserve this. They are learning, they're picking up what's going on. And what's going on is that they've been abandoned. They've been abandoned to a terrible future of a planet in decline. And so we read about anxiety amongst and depression amongst the young people. So this is why people, particularly of my age and my generation, why the gray-haired population of the world, and particularly the developed world, have to really put out, have to really get down to work, have to get active and aggressive with our governments and our corporations. We have to protect all our young people. This is absolutely fundamental. It's a sacred trust on all of us, and we got to stop letting them down. So we've got to get into the fight against the fossil fuel industry. Fight of all time. Thank you for listening.